And as we speak, thousands of ideas are percolating, and America is speaking out today. This listening effort will culminate next month with the release of a clear and positive agenda focused on getting people back to work again, because jobs is the issue. And where are the jobs? It's the question I hear almost everywhere I go. This agenda will reject the Washington knows best policies and offer a fresh start focused on unshackling small businesses, unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, and helping families across this great nation realize the American dream. Now, this won't be some document handed down by the Washington powers that be, you know, those of us that think we know it all, and the same old, same old. And it certainly won't be based on the idea that sitting in Washington, cutting backroom deals on a 2,000-page bill represents something like hope. We're building this agenda from the ground up by listening to the American people. Never before has the need for a fresh start in Washington been more pressing. I've discussed what we're up against in terms of addressing the immediate economic uncertainty. And beyond the sound bites and the headlines, Washington's gripped by a more entrenched uncertainty, a standstill bred from all the scar tissue built up between the two parties, all the kicking the can down the road, and all the interests that continue to prod us to keep doing so. I've said that if I were fortunate enough to be Speaker of the House, I would run the House differently. And I don't just mean differently than the way Democrats are running it today. I mean differently than both Democrats or Republicans in the past. That means challenging the old ways in Washington, getting to the bottom of what drives people crazy, and then trying to fix it once and for all. Look at spending. We don't need to just stop spending so much. We need to stop spending so irrationally. The common logic of Washington Democrats is that government spending creates jobs where money is used, you know, to build a hiking trail or a playground. Yet we have to remember, even when spending is not at record-setting levels, each dollar the government takes is taken directly out of the private sector. This is a lose-lose proposition, plain and simple. And on the front end, Washington's investments in the economy aren't nearly as efficient because government spending decisions often put a premium on political expedience rather than sound economic policy. And as we're learning now, deficit spending always comes due. Here's an example how out of hand things have become. And we see this in Washington all the time when politicians take victory laps for spending billions of dollars to continue to provide unemployment insurance. Now, these benefits are held up as a jobs plan, a stimulus for the economy. Keeping workers on the unemployment rolls instead of fostering small business and private sector growth is not a responsible jobs plan. The American people would agree, and so would I, that unemployment insurance is an important safety net, but it is not a responsible jobs program. The American people know what's going on here. They know that when the bill comes due, it's their pockets that Washington's going to look to for a bailout. We're seeing it right now with the president's plan to raise taxes. Listen, we need to have an open, honest conversation with the American people about the scope of our fiscal challenges. That means everything from short-term commitments to long-term commitments. It's an act of bad faith and bad judgment to start this conversation by imposing job-killing tax hikes on families and small businesses. Failing to rein in these debts is our fault, both Democrats and Republicans, and we should not punish unemployed workers and small business owners for our inability to make the tough choices that we're elected to make. We need to start looking at every government program and ask ourselves, is it right to force our kids and grandkids to pay for this? Mitch Daniels, the governor of Indiana, recently said, "You'd be really amazed at how much government you never miss." He's probably right. Just as we reevaluate how the federal government spends money, we should also rethink about how the federal government collects money. Washington's backward accounting assumes tax relief expires, while the spending will always continue, setting up a built-in bias for higher taxes and more spending. That is, of course, unless Congress extends the tax relief. So instead of making tough choices, Congress regularly ends up rubber stamping a haphazard collection of must-do tax policies from one year to the next. The so-called tax extenders bill is a prime example of this. This year's tax extender bill had 71 separate tax provisions in it, totaling $31.6 billion of tax relief. And more provisions get added each and every year, but few, if any, ever seem to fall out of the package. There's everything in there from the research and development tax credit, special expensing for the film industry, an extension and modification of a tax credit for the steel industry fuel. How about the mine rescue team training tax credit? Or tax incentives so you can invest in the District of Columbia. Are they worth it? Many of them are. But we just go ahead and extend all of them temporarily, usually right at the last minute, so Washington can continue to pander to the loudest voices instead of implementing the best ideas. For Washington, that's just business as usual, but it's no way to run a business, and it certainly is no way to run a government. We need to take a long, hard look at the undergrowth of deductions, credits, and special carve-outs that our tax code has become. And yes, we need to acknowledge that what Washington sometimes calls tax cuts are really poorly disguised spending programs that expand the role of government in the lives of individuals and employers. It was late Jack Kemp who once said, not all tax cuts are created equal. We need to bring simplicity and certainty to our tax code so we can make it a vehicle for sustainable pro-growth policies, not transfer payments to the favored few. By trying to build a recovery on government stimulus spending and failing, Washington's kept the private sector in bust, while the public sector has had a boom. Since February of 2009, the private sector has lost millions of jobs, while the federal government has grown by hundreds of thousands of workers. We've not just seen more government jobs, but better paying ones as well. Federal employees now make more, on average, than double what the private sector workers are paid. And what's more appalling is the fact that this gap has more than doubled in President Obama's first year in office, during a time when millions of American workers, private sector workers, either lost their jobs or took a pay cut just to keep the one that they already have. It's just nonsense to think that taxpayers are subsidizing the fattened salaries and pensions of federal bureaucrats who are out there making it harder to create private sector jobs. And as we speak, the Obama administration has in the queue 191 rules and regulations that could each have an estimated annual cost to our economy of $100 million or more, and some of them even over $1 billion. That's 191 new layers of red tape waiting in the wings, 191 de facto taxes on employers and consumers that keep people out of work and hamper innovation and investment. Small businesses can't plan for the future with ever-changing rules. And I wish I could tell you exactly what these new rules are, but there's no transparency here. Last week I sent a letter to the President asking for him to provide a full disclosure of these regulations so that we could share them with the American people. We received a response, but still no details on what all these new regulations really are. And no matter who's in charge, the federal government should not be able to issue job-threatening rules on a whim without public warning or proper scrutiny. Endless spending sprees, entangled tax structures, and bureaucracy run amok. These are all outgrowths of a tired, bloated, and broken Washington. Now more than ever, we need a fresh start that puts power back in the hands of the American people. As one citizen on America Speaking Out said, and I'll quote, "Just get out of the way." Republicans on the House Budget Committee, led by Congressman Paul Ryan, have already identified the $1.3 trillion in specific spending cuts that could be implemented immediately.